Foremost, what a pleasure it is to be here. Jonah, all of you, to see what AMEC has become, having started it quite a while ago, when there were literally 4 of us around the table. And that was the early days of AMEC, and look at you now. It's so impressive to see, and also the diversity of talent, of people, of cultures, of perspectives. So great to be here. I'm sharing some perspectives with you that, having started at the time what was Karma, became Echo. I sold the business. 8 years later, I bought the business back and really wanted to focus on measures that matter in a way that's really meaningful for organizations. A lot of organizations, a lot of companies out there, a lot of providers are doing really, really, really great work. A lot of it at the automated level. That's not necessarily where we are. And that's what I want to share with you today. So a little bit about Echo. We have clients from A to Z, all sectors, all geographies, but providing a number of pillars of insight, whether it's monitoring and media analysis, but really just saying what's out there that actually matters and is going to drive the organization forward. Right the way through to stakeholder work. We are very privileged to run Britain's Most Admired Company study for the London Stock Exchange, which I'll come on to in a moment. But with that also, we value corporate reputation, and have been doing that since, well, certainly the last 15 years, both in the UK and in the US, which again I want to share with you, and also share the reactions that we're getting from the market as a result. Because of the work we do and the range of things we get involved in, we stay in the world of insight. Yeah? So we're not consultants. We're providers of insight, but insight to serve a purpose. So it's really helping organizations move forward, be learning organizations as they progress. We're also expert witnesses in a court of law, not that any of you need it, but we've had a number of assignments specifically because of that, whether it's the BBC or others, saying we want to sue, and I'm going, no, you don't want to sue them, but I'll give you the evidence if you need it. We are expert witnesses, so we tend to work, we're very sort of neutral in terms of the data points and the platforms that we work with. The main thing for us is the quality of that data and the rigor of the data that it shows. So we tend to work with a lot of different data points for clients who often have a lot of data but need help in making it link. And I suppose that's really where we come together as Echo, is really making that link for organizations. We've had a great morning already, and it's already been mentioned, reputation is a team sport. I think Jim, if Jim's here, that was one of his comments. It doesn't happen in isolation. It doesn't sit in a communications department. It doesn't sit in a silo. It is a team sport. Operation shapes it. Leadership signals it. Employees amplify it, or otherwise. And stakeholders validate it, or otherwise. Reputation is also increasingly, corporate reputation, increasingly is making headline news. Whereas beforehand, people were saying, oh, that's reputation, it doesn't really matter. It's not going to get into the business pages. It's getting into the business pages. People are now saying, actually, if this is an evidence of value that companies have out there, they need to be thinking about it and measuring it, right the way through to why are communications still measured like a campaign, when so much of what communications do actually genuinely makes a difference. I mentioned the work we do with the London Stock Exchange on Britain's Most Admired Company study. It's the longest longitudinal study out there, along with Fortune's World's Most Admired. It goes back to 1990, originally started by a professor at Nottingham University, and we were on his advisory board. When he retired, Echo took it over, and running it, as I say, with the London Stock Exchange. Really, they love it because it allows us to celebrate good news for organizations. Many of you in the UK will know good news stories are thin on the ground, so it's a wonderful way to actually celebrate the best that is out there. And there's a lot of great things out there that actually are worthy of celebration. And as Dame Julia Hoggett, who's the chief executive of the London Stock Exchange, said, admiration cannot be claimed, it must be earned. And again, that's where communications comes in, and that's where the perspectives and the insights we've been talking about this morning come together. This is, if you don't recognize the photograph, this is Tufan Elgobic, who is the chief executive of Rolls-Royce, who was crowned this year as Most Admired Leader for 2025. One of the things we do with Britain's Most Admired study, it's a study across a very specific audience. Whenever we talk about reputation, we always say reputation for what, among whom, for what purpose. Really important to think about those things. Reputation for what, among whom, for what purpose. The Most Admired Company study, and we'll always qualify this, it isn't a universal, it isn't an integrated reputation audit. It is a very specific view from competitors, C-suite competitors, all the listed C-suite competitors of the FTSE companies, and their financial analysts. So basically, the two groups that are least likely to do anyone any favors. So to be earning an accolade from that group is quite something. But it is a very specific audience. We ask them to rate the companies they know in their sector. So it's quite a defined quantitative study, to Jim's point about quantitative and qualitative. But we also ask a number of qualitative questions. We don't want anyone to spend more than about 10 minutes on the survey. So it's, how much can you ask in how little space and how quickly? But quite often it's what's top of your mind, what's worrying you, what are barriers to growth, what are paths to growth, how are you looking at the future? So the top 3 opportunities that businesses see, clearly we've been hearing a lot about technology and AI. There is a twin, it's got its evil twin, which we'll talk about in the next one. But technology and AI I see as a big engine of growth and opportunities ahead, genuinely across the spectrum. Interestingly, and at Knott's Force, this is open-ended, reputation and trust is also seen as a big engine of growth and a big opportunity. So businesses, and this is C-suite we're inviting to take part in this, are getting it and they're seeing it. The value of trust, particularly in an age of AI, is increasingly important. Who do you trust? Why do you trust? How am I going to put my faith in you? And for those who are talking about this afternoon, culture, talent, retention, and acquisition, again, really important. It's a whole factor in resilience, which again, I'll come on to in a moment. So interesting perspectives there, things that they worry about. Clearly, yes, geopolitical uncertainty is up there for everyone, but the evil twin of AI is there, which is cybersecurity, which actually, at that time, this was a year ago, was in 3rd place, is probably now just about in 1st place, I should think, this year. So the concerns there about businesses. But going back to the issue of trust and the importance of reputation and trust, how do we ensure that we're speaking the board's language? How do we ensure that we're making that connectivity? Currently, while most organizations would say reputation is a really, really, really important factor and trust is really important, it is a blind spot. It is a blind spot for most leaders and businesses. And yet, it drives revenue growth, supports the margin, reduces risk, drives talent, supports investor confidence, as we see, and certainly gets the customer loyalty. The issues of behavior that we're really looking at. So why does reputation matter? It's because it gives us the behavior that we need. And yet, it's not fully measured or fully understood. And yet, if reputation was damaged tomorrow, how much enterprise value would evaporate with that? So the overall, what we see here is boardroom issues. Clearly, these are the things that are talked about: client retention, the license to operate, the regulatory environment, so important for so many organizations. Yes, we've talked about talent, resilience. We are now no longer in continuous crisis. We are absolutely in ongoing crises, And therefore, how do you make sure that you can keep on standing up and going forward when you are faced with things that sometimes you cannot anticipate? So resilience becomes really, really important. And certainly, I think we saw during COVID how resilient so many organizations, so many people were when it really mattered. It was extraordinary. And yet we're quite quick to go back to where we were before COVID. But certainly COVID was an interesting observation in terms of resilience and innovation. And clearly, businesses will be interested in long-term growth and their competitive differentiation. Reputation plays a part in each and every one of these. So one of the things we see, and I know we're not the only one out there, but as I say, we've got a longitudinal pattern here, and we're probably being conservative. In fact, I'm sure we are, because we're only looking at the FTSE 100 and 250. I'm not taking in the value and the economic benefit of all the private companies, or the venture capital-backed companies, or the PE-backed companies. I'm talking about FTSE 350. So I'm talking about a fairly small universe. The same thing with the S&P. We've got about S&P 500. The long-term average of value that actually is supporting the market capital confidence of an organization, the long-term average is about 30%. Now, any organization that says 30% of your value is in your reputation, surely you would have the systems, the processes, the resources, the people in place to support it, protect it, develop it. Yeah? So when organizations are saying we're cutting our PR department, I'm going, you're risking 28% of your value on average. Yeah, you stop communicating, you stop engaging with the outside world, with the inside world, you're risking a really, really, really valuable asset. I'm not saying PR is exactly 28%, but it's a huge factor that actually supports and drives that. This is the long-term average we see. It does change with the economic pattern we're in. It does change with the sort of the headwinds that we're facing, be it the financial crisis, be it Brexit, be it COVID, or the cost of living crisis. Yeah? But it is a long-term average of about 30%. This is all free to download. You'll see in a moment. I've got a QR code where you can capture any of this if this is helpful. This isn't just a pretty chart. Every single one of those lines represents a unique company. Every single one of those lines is an individual company. Right at the top, you have Rolls-Royce, BAE. In the defense sector, highly prized at this particular time. They weren't always up there. Defense, certainly the sector that you're in, at the time that you're in that sector, has an influence on this. Because that's where I'm talking about the financial markets. Reputation for what, among whom, for what purpose. That's what the financial markets are interested in. At the bottom end of the spectrum, we have Wizz Air, struggling to take off, and WPP. And there's also actually a group that's based here in Dublin that actually is probably doing all right, but its reputation isn't as strong as it possibly could be. And as I say, in between that, every one of those is an individual company. Sector matters. Who you are, where you're sitting. Are you a good house in a bad street, or are you an average house in a poor street? What sector are you in? How does that actually affect your reputation, and actually what you can do with it? So utilities, a lot of the monopolies, there is value there. There is value in terms of the reputation, but only so much because they are monopolies, yeah? As opposed to things like consumer staples, energy, industrials, healthcare. A lot of it is driven by reputation. Of all the things that we present to companies, it's not so much the value, saying this is a big number. It's going to be a big number. It is a huge value. It's driving a behavior that matters to listed companies, which is why we quite like it, because we're saying, now that we have your attention, can we talk about why communications matters and why prioritization around things that drive and support that reputation matters? It goes back to this evidence base. This is a chart of saying, actually, okay, the company has a certain value, not just the number is impressive, but actually what does the DNA of that reputation look like? Where are your strengths? Where are things that are perhaps not working so well for you? How does that compare to your competitors? What is the white space? Understand the architecture of your reputation. For this particular audience, I am saying it from a financial point of view, but it does tend to get board attention. Understand the architecture, and therefore have that to support your prioritization. This is an example for Johnson & Johnson. It's a real example. It's presented to the board. And it actually starts to highlight where there is strong long-term value. J&J has always been one of the ones that all the funds wanted to have shares in, long-term value for J&J at the time. Globally competitive, you can see factor contribution of their reputation against actually the leverage, how much they can actually do to address it. So things that are not working so well for them at the time. Quality of goods and services. It was a time when they were having a lot of product recalls, yeah, and the market was worried about that. So it's an opportunity to get right, but it's an operational issue. It's not a communication issue. So you start to look at this from a perspective saying, what is right, what is wrong, what is operational, what is communication? The communication issue was actually innovation. At the time, J&J was not talking about innovation. And when I asked them about it, they said, no. Babies and innovation don't go together. And I said, no, but healthcare and wellness and innovation go together. So that started two things. One, it drove among the pillars of growth, that the board agreed on, and therefore all the leadership got behind. The main pillars of growth came out of that, saying they needed to get operationally the product of qualities and services right. That was an operational issue. Messaging-wise, they had to ladder up innovation messages across their 243 businesses. And by the way, most of the innovation messages are sitting in pharma, not in over-the-counter. And that also started the thinking about separating J&J, pharma versus consumer. Yeah, very different businesses. But they started to think about it in a way in terms of saying, how do we prioritize our messaging, our narrative, our investments behind things we know are going to make a difference? You have evidence. So when communicators come to boards and they'll say, we have all these amazing metrics, we have a lot of data, it's not speaking the board's language. It's just not connecting. Yeah? Yes, you need to know the basics of your output activities, how they're coming through, but when you ladder it up to the board, you need to think about what value are we bringing to the board? What difference do we as an organization, do we as a function provide our leaders, our masters, our organization together? Yeah? Going beyond vanity metrics. And I don't want to use that disparagingly because there are a lot of metrics that are useful in terms of how can we learn, how can we do better. But when you're talking to senior decision makers, these are the things that they want to look at. They want to understand what's driving stakeholder behavior. What's going to make me more attractive? Maybe to my analysts, maybe to my future talent, perhaps, certainly to my regulators and my policymakers and so on. How do I understand that? That is a hugely valuable point of insight that communications plays a part of. Yeah? Investment prioritization, resourcing, at a time when they're cutting things that make, to my mind, make no sense that they're cutting, when actually they're needed more than ever. Anticipating risk. Increasingly, we're finding interest is coming from not so much the comms department, but the head of risk, saying, talk to us about risk. And I'm going, yes, but can I also talk to you about opportunity? The other side of that coin. And the alignment with the enterprise vision and values. So, things to think about. What difference are you making to the organization by providing the support that you are providing? Yeah, and we talked a lot about that this morning, so I have to thank John, I have to thank Jim, I have to thank all the previous speakers because you teed it up. We're talking the same language. I think we understand this is where things have to go. It's not saying the other measures don't matter, but it's actually saying as you look up, we have to rethink what we're providing to our senior leaders to say, we make a difference. It isn't about scorecards, it isn't about campaign summaries. Early warning systems, looking around the corner, stakeholder perspectives, the things we were hearing about this morning. Forecasting, benchmarking. Yeah? What are the trade-offs? What are the decisions an organization should be thinking about to say, we can do this, we can do that. We actually have a defensible position for not doing this but focusing on that. Because you have to prioritize. Everyone has to prioritize. You can't do everything. So provide that evidence of where those priorities will make a difference. So the best organizations, as you would expect, operate with transparency. They're ethical. There's a lot of integrity there. They're building the internal trust first. Again, I know we're going to hear about culture in a moment. They're aligning their own goals with societal expectations. They're trying to anticipate where stakeholders are going, and they're really thinking about reputation as an enterprise-wide responsibility, the team sport. Yeah? Everyone should own it. Everyone needs to own it. So a lot of our work is actually helping organizations really understand how it is spread across the whole organization and everyone's role within that. And I think, again, we've heard a lot about AI. In this AI world, the issue of trust, the issue of credibility, is going to be probably one of the most precious assets you can develop. So, don't just track visibility. Think about drivers of trust, drivers of behavior. Yeah? You know, if you've got pillars that, you know, a lot of, I've seen studies coming through saying these are our reputation pillars. In media, I'm going, well, how do you know? How do you know that these are the drivers of the behavior you're trying to get? Get that evidence, then you can build it in. Use stakeholder insight, we've talked about that. Integrate the reputation metrics into enterprise-wide strategy. What are the pillars of growth? What are the pillars of prioritization that the whole organization needs to get behind? The new chief executive of BBC is the former head of Google, and he's an Olympic rower, and all his analogies are about rowing. And it's all about rowing in the same direction. If you all row in the same direction, you'll get there. But if you've got people going in different directions, silos taking you off in different corners, you might not get to the finishing line. Think about cross-functional ownership for reputation. It isn't one person's job. It can't be. Yeah? And link it to executive accountability. Yeah? Again, Jim mentioned this, this issue of measurement. The best organizations don't just measure more, they really measure what matters. Yeah? These things matter. What are they measuring? What are they thinking about? What evidence do they have behind each and every one of these? And the one thing I always say is, as we come through it, actually, what gets bonused gets done. So can we build in some of these things into executive accountability and bonuses? If we're moving the needle with our regulators, if we're moving the needles with our key stakeholders, these should be part and parcel of the bonus structure. So we have to move on from some of the things we've been comfortable with, into not just how did our campaign perform, but what are we going to do differently as we go forward? What do we learn from this? Yeah? How do we move forward, and how are we actually demonstrating we make a difference to the organization? Because we know that. We just have to show it in a language that leaders understand. We have, I've got a couple of QR codes of reports if you're interested in this area. But Charles Tilley is the chair of the Integrated Reporting Council, which is part of the International Financial Reporting Standards. And they're very focused on integrated measurement, looking at intangibles beyond the financial. So they do a lot of work with the major accountancy bodies and all the financial reporting bodies. Increasingly, stakeholder perspectives, internally and externally, will be featured in annual reports. And increasingly, annual reports are going to be read by machines before they're read by humans. So are we thinking that through for organizations and helping them address this? It's a big part of value creation and planning, generally. So reputation isn't priceless because it can't be measured. We know it can. But it's priceless because organizations simply cannot succeed without it. So with that, there are some QR codes. If you're interested in any of these reports, please download them. They're free to access. But some of the perspectives from Britain's Most Admired Companies, but also from reputation evaluation over time, what that means for communicators and for the measurement industry. And that's it.
Brilliant. Round of applause for Sandra. Thank you so much. All right, we have time for one, maybe two questions. Who will take the question? If you won't, I will be very greedy and take it. Tim Markline saves you from the greed, yeah.
Thank you, Sandra. You've been focused on reputation for a long time, so I'm curious, what's maybe changed in the past few years as you've been talking with clients about it?
Thank you, Tim. That's a really good question. That's also why I came back into Karma, having sold the business, and I was sort of working as an independent. And I could see a lot of companies starting to talk about this, whereas 20 years ago they weren't. They weren't talking reputation. And they even, right at the beginning, people were saying, no, PR can't be measured. Yes, it can. So, so you can see that change in thinking at boardrooms around saying, oh, actually, we need to get a handle on this. What we also see for very large, sophisticated organizations, they have a lot of data, but it's not talking to each other. It's apples and oranges. So silos are not helping companies, I think. HR will sit on their HR results, and marketing will sit on their customer results, and IR will sit on what they get from analysts, but they don't share it. And so quite often we'll say, could you just align this? Are you asking the same questions? Can we bring it together? What can the organization learn from this? So I think that issue of, yes, it's important, but there's still that question of how do we go about it? And quite often I'll say, well, what do you already have? And they have more than they know they have. Yeah. It's getting there. It's getting there, which is really good.
Thank you, Tim. Yes. Let's go for the question. Perfect.
Hello, your presentation is so timely. I'm the CEO of a media intelligence and analysis company in the Caribbean. And two of my board members, one is an accountant and the other is a former CEO. and they are convinced that instead of pitching our services to marketing and communications professionals, we should actually be pitching it to the C-suite. I just wanted to know, what do you think, especially in light of what you just presented?
Yeah, well, that's why we said, thank you. Lovely question, wonderful opportunity. I would be sad to bypass communications, because when you look at an organization across the whole piece, who has that bandwidth? It tends to be comms, no one else. And comms will have the tiniest budget, which makes no sense. Yeah, makes no sense. But they've got that purview across the whole piece. So I would be sad to not bring the CCO with us on this journey, but we are getting those questions from risks, from CFOs, from heads of IR, saying, we know this stuff matters. Is there another way to look at it? So come in. And I'm going, where's your CCO? Or where are the agencies that are supporting you? Because this is, everyone will have a view on it, and everyone's contributing to it. But I would take the CCO with us. Otherwise, they'll be left behind. And how long have heads of communication saying, we want a seat at the board? And I'm going, but if you have a seat, be prepared to have a different conversation and think about that contribution that you're making. Especially when we've been hearing all this morning about AI, and AI been doing a lot of things, so comms can suddenly become that ambassadorial role that thinks and has that perspective and that judgment for the organization, that maybe risk can still be quite siloed. IR will be very siloed, and helping bridge those two. But thank you. Lovely question, lovely opportunity.
One last question here. Please just wait for the microphone for the virtual delegates. Thank you.
If you had to have one KPI for reputation on a group leadership team level scorecard, what would that KPI look like?
We get asked that. People say we want one score for reputation. And we do that for companies, but I do it with a lot of caveats. And my caveat is, I will give it to you, but you need to know what's gone into it, and you also need to know what it's made up of. Otherwise, you're looking at a number in isolation, which means nothing. And particularly if you're international, there may be things that are doing really, really well in Asia, but Europe, you're suffering. One score, on average, you're doing fine. So I'm wary of single scores. It is possible. We tend to use NPS a lot. NPS, Net Promoter Scores. Yeah, because that is, again, a language that a lot at the senior level will understand. So you're saying, okay, let's look at that. What is the bandwidth? Not just the absolute number, but what is the bandwidth that you should be thinking about? And where are the levers? Because unless you understand where the levers are, it's a number in isolation.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Round of applause for Sandra, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Fantastic.